Can you talk about the difference between an entrepreneur filmmaker and a work-for-hire filmmaker?
It's funny, Jonathan Wood, he used to run the American film market for about 3 decades. He was always say that there is two types of producers, right? There is the producers that they come from distribution and they make content because they need for distribution. And then they have the people that make movies because they want to make movies, and then they need to find distribution. And usually the former do better than the latter, right? But in terms of like the entrepreneur producer, it's something of kind of a dying breed. We used to do that. That's how the industry worked, is that you gather $5, $6, $10 million, whatever it is, you make a film, and then you go to Cannes and you take it to market and you sell territory by territory, and you kind of make your profit like that. But since a lot of the foreign markets kind of died, with the death of the DVD, really, that model doesn't exist anymore. It's really a game of very high budget films that have pre-sellable cast. But if anybody would say like, hey, just make a movie now for $6 million and hope to sell it, it's like, oof, that's not a business model anymore. That's too tough. And the streaming world took the models from TV, which is, I will greenlight it, I will pay you to make it, you'll get a fee, but basically that's going to be it. That's how we made back in the day the movies for Sci-Fi Channel, or the Lifetime movies, or basically get a fee, and you kind of need to bake it in or to get your fee within the budget. But then what is your motivation to kind of give it the extra mile, right? Because you're not going to get more, you don't have reporting, or there's always the fight about what residuals you can get if the movie does better on a Netflix or a streaming service. So I still think it's complicated, because when you make a film, when somebody gives you a budget to make a film and you make the film for them, and you're not going to have ownership, you're not going to have any upside. The question is how much money you spend, right? And the answer is always, there's only one right answer, right? It's as less as possible, right? I mean, you really should spend as less as possible to get the next gig, right? Because every dollar more that you spend is for what? Your ego, or I don't know. It's not really as a business, right? As a part of the business model. And I think that was a bit of the demise of some of those channels, like the Sci-Fi Channel, that it was a battle for less and less quality, because they used to give $1 million X, and people spent less and less. So they got less revenue because, the movies were not as good. So they gave filmmakers less, and then the quality went even more down. And then, I think that's kind of how we end up with a lot of unscripted, between that and the writer's strike. So a lot of those channels kind of end up just doing kind of reality and this other type of content. But, companies like when we started, we used to do all this like Sci-Fi Channel originals, and there's a lot of mouth that used to be fed by making those made-for-TV films.
Well, I've heard you say in other interviews the term, the entrepreneur,
producer, yeah.
Okay, producer. And so it sounds like that's not feasible anymore. Maybe that was a dream of a lot of people.
I think it's some people try to cling to that model. I'm not doing that, for sure. That's how we used to make, that's how we make Biggest Spider and, Turbo Kid and all those. I think today you really need to come in with a plan. You really need to know where the movie is going to go, how much money you're going to be making. I think the whole let's just make it and hope to get to a festival and hope to get picked up and hope there's not going to be a recession and hope, it's like, okay, just fill up lottery ticket at that point, I think you much more need to treat this as a business these days, if you're in the business of making money. Now, I think that's one thing that a lot of, I spend time in festivals and conferences and online, and sometimes filmmakers or inspiring filmmakers complain about the distribution and all of this and all that, but is something to be reminded, like, it's okay to have a hobby or to like spend money on something you want to do. You don't have necessarily to do it for money, right? And if you want to do it for money, then you need to treat it like a business, but you can kind of come in both ways, right? A lot of people kind of, want to treat it like it's a hobby on the first, step 1 to 5, but then complain from step 6 to 10 that, somebody's screwing them, or there's gatekeepers, all sort of, kind of buzzwords you hear on social media, which a lot of them are not really true. When I sold my previous company, I started this organization called the Entertainment Free Clinic. It was right before COVID, and COVID kind of killed it because it was an in-person event. And we used to have all these executives meeting once a month. Basically, we would take a corner in a coffee shop, and people would sign up, and they would come and ask for advice, or show their contract or their reports. And a lot, and we thought like, okay, we're going to help people with their career, and maybe weed out some of the predatory distributors, and you find that a lot of time it's the filmmakers themselves kind of shooting themselves in the foot. A lot because of getting excited about working with a company. So. When company X comes and, we're just so excited, they just want to work with them, they'll take any deal, and then a year later, they'll be like, well, my deal is shitty. It's like, well, remember that you said you don't care about it? If you're going to sleep as a devil, you're going to get hurt, but, don't complain about it later. And you find out that a lot of these times it's unrealistic expectation, or people excited to get in bed with the wrong people and for the wrong reasons. And some of it is companies exercising leverage, which might be not nice, but it's definitely not illegal or predatory, or, in terms of ethics, I mean, that's a whole conversation, but, maybe you can say it's a little bit unethical, but, if you Netflix, you set up the price, period, so it's like, what do you want to do, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. There's so many great points. Do you think then the filmmakers are so excited that someone wants to take their film that they don't do their due diligence? They're not researching, they don't go in with an attorney to look at the contract, and then they realize, oh, wait, I'm signing away stuff in perpetuity. I'm not really being careful.
I think it's a lot of getting bad advice. It's funny, I read it in a comment on social media, so I find it funny because it was about social media, but I think somebody asked a question, and I read it. Somebody wrote, finding filmmaking advice on social media is like looking for an architect at the parking lot of Home Depot. And okay. And it's so true. It's like people give advice and have websites and everything because they made half a movie that had half a success, and they treat it like they know everything, and people spreading all this advice based on their own, experience, which is minimal, and I think, I don't know if lawyers is the answer. I think talking with executives, and also, it's almost like apply basic logic. I always tell people, like, you just need to ask a question of a 5-year-old. Just apply, like, keep it simple, stupid. If you look at ask and take lists, and the ask is 5 million and the take is 1 million, and your movie costs 200 to make, a lot of people are like, oh, so on average we're gonna make, $3 million. Like, ask yourself, are you expecting, what is your expectation? Like, are you expecting to sell all the territories? Like, how many of those territories are you gonna sell? Like, how close are you gonna be to the takes or to the ask, And what you find is a lot of people, and I don't know if lawyers do it because you mentioned lawyers, but I used to give a lecture at USC for a friend of mine who used to guest speak about, my lecture was called The 4 Things Your Law Negotiation Matter. One of them was the ask and take list, because I find that a lot of filmmakers think that if you have an ask and a take, about the middle ground is going to be how much money you're going to be made. But it's like, that is so far from the truth. The ask and take have like all these prices for countries. You're going to sell 2 or 3 territories. If your take is $1 million, you're probably going to maybe make 300. And I find that looking at a lot of reports for thousands of movies, that if you want to put a thumb rule on it, I would say 1/4 to 1/3 of your takes is the actual sales that the film makes, on average.
Okay, so when you're looking at a distribution contract, there's something called an ask and a take. Okay.
So I'm sorry, do we need to explain that?
Yeah, would you please?
So
Yeah.
an ask and take.
Like I'm a 5-year-old, by
Yeah.
the way.
So
Okay.
Mommy made a movie.
Okay, great, thank you.
But an ask and take list is something that you use in sales agreement with your sales agent. It's a list that basically spells every territory and what is the all rights ask and what is the all right take. The ask is how much money we're going to ask somebody, and the take is what we're willing to take, usually without the producer's approval. So if it's below that number, you can still, email the producers or call them and try to get, try to approve the deal. But usually when you go to a market like Cannes or MIPCOM or FM or whatever it is, if it's above the take, you're allowed to just close the deal. Few problems with that. First of all, the ask really doesn't matter, right? Because as a professional, I sit in the room. If RTL2 from Germany, comes in, I'm not going to ask them the same number that I'm going to ask from some, wannabe DVD label. That's, it's just not the same numbers. I'm not going to undercut myself from a deal because, the number is low, but RTL2 is interested, and they buy movies for 200,000 euros for, just a 3-year license. I'm going to ask them for 50 just because it's there on the sheet. And the other way around, I'm not going to ask if I'm trying to get offers, I'm not going to scare somebody from a big number. So the ask is kind of silly as it is. The take is interesting because you kind of want to set expectation, right? But there is so many other factors that go into it that usually the lawyers and the filmmakers don't really ask about, or the take is usually for all rights, right? So it's well, what if I'm just selling, TV and VOD, of course, because the movie's an indie film, it's not theatrical and there's no home video market anyway. So now you're allowed to do it. So now you're spelling that in the agreement. I think it's important to have expectation. In our company, we don't do ask and take list because again, I think it's kind of a waste of time, and it actually confuses the filmmakers more than explaining them. We do talk about what's the expectation before each market. So you're not going to have the same list on the first market as you're going to have 3 years later, which is a lot of what those agreements kind of, they just have a list. And, if a movie's been around for a year, you're not going to sell for those prices, So that's about ask and take list for
Interesting. Okay.
in 3 minutes.
Okay, so if I have an old classic car that I want to sell, and I want to say, well, my ask is 10,000, but I'm willing to take 7,500. Why would I want to reveal my cards like that? Is that because you don't want to have to be calling the filmmaker?
Well, that list is between the filmmaker and the sales agent.
Okay, so it's never revealed to the potential buyer.
Not in general.
Okay.
Sometimes with relationships, and maybe it's a good tactic to go hey, here's my take, just give me that number and let's close. It could be a good trick to do it. I mean, you can also change the number. That's the problem with the ask and take list, that it's just an Excel sheet. It's you can change, you can add a zero, it takes a second, right? And a lot of people make their entire decisions based on that. And when you look at those ask and take lists, because we do, part of the Entertainment Free Clinic, we were looking at a lot of ask and take lists, and you go look, forget about being a lawyer or, just look at this list and tell me if it makes sense. You have $1 million in China, okay? Your movie is a lesbian movie with drugs, and violence and who knows what, Do you really think it's going to pass censorship in China? So why is the number there? So, and you hear filmmakers, they choose company B over company A because company B had $10 million in ask and takes. And it's they're more excited and they value my movie better. It's no, they're just blinding you with empty promises, or you look at wait a minute, so I have 50 grand in Germany and I have 50 grand in Portugal. Do you know the difference between the German and the Portuguese, economy? Did you look at those? Does that make any sense to you? So obviously this company never really sells Portugal, so they just put a big number so the bottom line becomes bigger. So there's all these tricks with this ask and take list to really kind of blind and confuse the filmmakers. In a lot of time, Clay Epstein from Filmo, they always say the first sales agent is honest, pay the price, and the second one gets a deal. Because when you go look, you have a horror movie, I looked at it, it's low budget, it's going to sell Germany, UK, maybe Japan, you're going to squeeze 60 grand out of this the most. then they don't take this guy because it's like, well, they're not believing in my movie. And they take the company, they tell them like, we're going to do a big party at AFM and, and all of that. And then, a year later, kind of like, well, he was right, it's a low budget horror movie with nobody in it, whatever, the economics, I'm just kind of coming up with something. But so you kind of need to be realistic about it. And a lot of times it's like, I remember like, I was a very young executive at the American film market, and filmmaker came in, he was trying to sell me a short film. And I very like naively said like, okay, so you make short films? Like, yes. Like, so when was the last time you bought a DVD with like a collection of short films? Like, I've never done it. It's like, okay. When was the last time you bought a ticket to the cinema and like sat there with like watching, you paid for a ticket and watched short films? Oh, it doesn't happen. Okay. Did you ever watch TV and there was like short films and you saw commercials? Like, no. So like, so you're a short filmmaker and how old are you? 40? In 40 years, you generated 0 cents to short films. So why do you think there is money to be made with that? I mean, like how rare of a, yes, if it's nominated for an Oscar or whatever, I don't know, like people make money from adaptations or other thing, but in general, short films are just calling cards, so of course, YouTube came in and other places to monetize them, but back, this was 2008, it's like, it's like, where would you put it? You know what I mean? An airline buys 4 of them because they nominate for an airline, for Oscar, and they put them on their airline, and also then nobody sees them. So,
So the sort of the notion of becoming the next Kevin Smith or Tarantino, that came and went, and even those filmmakers, now it's all based on a new model. And it's not about necessarily just doing the piece you want to do. You've got to look at the economics of it.
I think that the models that created Kevin Smith or Tarantino is, on one hand, doesn't exist. On the other hand, best time ever to do that. Because when you were young Quentin Tarantino, you still had to get film wheels and a film camera. And, even if you don't do anything, just to get that material and get it developed, you actually used to use chemicals and all that kind of stuff. There was a barrier to entry that you need, whatever it is, $1 million just to walk into a set, right? Today you can make on your iPhone and make with Sora VFX that looks better than Avengers. So I would argue and say that both in terms of the technology to make the content, if you're talented enough, and to get it out on distribution, you don't need anything. Like if your content is really, if you're that talented and you put it on YouTube or put it on Instagram or TikTok, if it's a vertical, whatever, things get discovered by the evil algorithm that give people what they want to see. If you have something that people want to see, it will find you, right? Or with a little push, it will find you. And like, look, like my friend Oren Pell, he created Paranormal Activity, right? Okay. So he was not a filmmaker at all, right?
Okay, I'm thinking
so
the other guy.
he taught himself to shoot, edit, color, he taught himself like as a hobby to do all of that. I mean, the house, in the car, everything is his stuff, in Paranormal Activity. But it was that damn good, so it got discovered, and it is Paranormal Activity now. Now, does that mean that, anything that's great is going to be discovered? Like, I'm sure there is some great movies somewhere that, they just never see the light of day. Of course there is, But in general, I think that we have so many opportunities to people that willing to, grab it by the horn. I mean, it's like, just think about it. Like, I remember like in the beginning of my career, it's like working with film and dealing with like, how many, like people don't realize how it used to be that you had to have a big theatrical release in America, right? Because you need to create thousands of films, right? Now in the international market, it didn't make sense to make reels for the international market. So you had to open big in the US, right? Because the opening was like the most amount of screens, right? Because then, okay, we have 1,000 screens, 1,000 prints, 100 of them are going to go to Turkey, 50 of them are going to go to Poland. And there was like labs that you had to send them to like burn on them. They actually burn on the film, those subtitles. Now you couldn't really use them in other countries. So you had to make all this calculation and like just the amount of organization that now, like with a click of a button, we can deliver them with 64 cinemas that we have connected digitally, that we literally can put tonight a movie with a click of a button. You know what I mean? If it's, you know, good enough, or if it breaks out, or whatever, you know. So I think there was actually more opportunities to be Quentin Tarantino or Kevin Smith today than when, you know, Tarantino became Tarantino.
Also to the Blair Witch Project,
Yes.
same type of thing.
Same type of thing.
But now there's so much that's found footage that's
Right.
been done that maybe it's.
But by the way, there was the Blair Witch Project, and then there was Paranormal Activity. In between, there was a lot of fun footage stuff, you know?
Okay.
I don't think, you know, when something is good, you know, it breaks out. I remember watching Paranormal Activity in a screening in, it was in Sundance, it was in Slam Dance, right? Like the ugly sister, whatever you want to call it. You know, across the street.
Right.
And I remember the silence in the room, like, you know, like people were just looking at the screen, like to find, like, is the door gonna move? Is the window, like the tension, like it was just really well made. And I think, you know, people like to ignore, think like there was Blair Witch and then there was Paranormal Activity. There was a million of fun footage movies in between, you know, and there was a million movies later. And, you know, stories, you know, a lot of people are like, well, this has been done. It's like sometimes like, oh, you know, shark movie been done. Like maybe it's time to make, you know, another version of that, or you know. So I think a lot of time people scared, like, oh, it's very similar to something, but it doesn't mean that, you know, you cannot bring something new to it or breathe a new interpretation of it, or you know, reinvent it in a way. And I really do think, like, when you see what SOAR does now, I mean, it's really, by the time, you know, we publish this interview, the technology is already going to be even further than that. And you know, we use a lot of the technology. You know, it's if I look at movies that we just did a year ago and how much we paid for every VFX, you know, then 6 months later it was, you know, it was 3,000 a shot, then it was 300 a shot. Now it's like, oh, the director just does it himself, you know, in his laptop, you know, and it looks even better than the 3,000 shot that used to have, you know, the retro, you know, the team doing the retroscoping and this and that. And it's like, computer does it better, you know. Is it a bad thing that people lose jobs? You know, I don't think so. I think it can elevate them to do higher level jobs and tell more stories, right?
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.